Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's November 2024 REC Release drop-in session. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. And today I'm joined by Holly Law, the Code Release Manager. And just before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping. So we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off. The event will be recorded, so if you miss anything, there is an opportunity to refer back to the recording and the slides. We'll also be using Slido. The QR code is on the screen now, and the joining code as well. And I'll also pop a link in the chat, and there'll be an opportunity for Q&A throughout. So if you have any questions, just pop it into Slido. So I'll just wait for everyone to scan that and join in on Slido. So we've got a few more people. We've had a few other people join in. So the Slido QR code is on the screen now, and you can use that to answer any questions. So let's move on to the agenda for today. And I think this is a busy release, so I'll hand over to Holly.
It is, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Holly, I'm the release manager, and I'll be taking you through the changes that have been agreed for the November release. As you can see, it's quite a busy release. So we've got, there's 14 there, but we've had 13 agreed for this release. 182 is still awaiting authority decision, so that won't go into the November release, but I'll cover that a bit later down. So yeah, I'll just jump straight into it and go through each of the changes. So the first change that we have, if you want to move, thank you. So the first one that we have is R49, and it's intellectual property rights and service data main body changes. This has been raised by the Central Registration Service Provider to address risks that they've identified, and that's associated with clause 13 of the REC main body, and it's all relating to intellectual property rights. Operational realities that have emerged since the REC go live mean that the clauses drafted prior to go live need to be reviewed, and that's to reflect the current CRS practices. The Central Registration Services intellectual property rights provisions in the code, as I mentioned, were drafted before designation of 1.0 of the code. And the way that they are written primarily seek to deal with the CRS services IPR as if it were developed and owned by the CSR service provider or its contractors, when actually in reality, much of the solution is built upon third-party owned software. Or platform services that are available to the market. So that's what this change has been brought in to do. So as you can see there, the only impacted stakeholder really is the CSR provider. And the changes to the products will be the REC main body and Schedule 1 interpretations and definitions. So within the REC main body, there'll be changes to clause 5.3 and 13. And within Schedule 1, the definition for intellectual property rights has been amended, and a new definition for interface and the definition for user has been removed. So if I move on to the next one, which should be R69, which is amendments to sample access agreement. So several non-party REC service users have entered into an access agreement with RECO under the code's qualification and maintenance schedule, and that's to obtain access to the CSS and become a CSS user. These access agreements are based on the sample access agreement, which is appended to Schedule 9 in the code, and DCC believe it should be revised to address issues that they've identified. So Schedule 9 qualification and maintenance is being amended so that non-REC party service users will be bound to Schedule 26, which is the switching service management schedule, as this is mandatory for all other REC service users. And they'll also be included within paragraph 7.2, which then binds them to clause 20 of the REC main body. As you can see there, the stakeholders that will be impacted are the CRS provider and non-party REC service users, and they'll be impacted by the changes to the code that I've just covered. So next on the list is 92A, which is DCC service level agreements for the switching incentive regime, and this is the alternative solution. So requirements for the central switching service were drafted during design, build and test phase of the Ofgem-led switching programme as a basis for the procurement of switching systems. And these requirements were later baselined within the REC service definitions as SLAs or service level agreements. And so following the successful go live of the CSS, these SLAs merit a review, and that's to make sure that they are realistic, given the physical systems design and the actual behaviours of users compared to the assumptions that were made in the early design phase of the switching programme. This particular change was raised as the vehicle to complete that review and take forward any identified changes. On the 22nd of July 2024, the authority rejected R92 and approved R92A for implementation. The central switching service and switching operator service definitions are being updated as part of this change. Stakeholders that are impacted will be the CRS provider, and the switching operator, and they'll be impacted by those changes to the products. The actual changes which are happening are to paragraph 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 of the switching service definition, and 5.2 and 5.4 of the switching operator definition. So the next change on the list is R94. And this is clarify obligations on gas meter exchanges that occur close to COS. So this change has been raised to address an issue with the switch with a concurrent change of MEM process. MEMs are obliged to issue on jobs to the CDSP as part of a meter exchange. However, this would not be issued if the MEM has received a de-appointment flow as part of the switch. So this change will obligate MEMs to issue on jobs for any completed meter exchanges, even after receiving a de-appointment flow. And that will ensure that the meter technical details are available to the gaining supplier and the MEM. As meter equipment managers are going to be impacted, as well as gas suppliers and central data service provider. Schedule 14 is being updated. And it's the tables within 6.4, 7.5, 8.5 and 9.5 are going to be amended. Next on the list, we've got R0113, which is data specification updates and clarifications. So it's been identified that gaps or misaligned references were transferred into the REC data spec at REC Go Live. And this change proposal seeks to fill those gaps, and it will provide clarification for parties. It will enable parties to self-serve and reduce the risk of ambiguities in the current data spec, resulting in incorrectly defined market messages. The change will update all the relevant text in the REC data spec to provide clarification. The data specification, data catalogue and the standard definitions are being updated. There are quite a few changes listed as part of this change, but if you go on to the REC portal, in the final change report for this change, there is quite a handy table there which lists all of the changes. So if you are curious as to what they are, go and have a look. So it's quite a simplified form. And all REC parties are going to be impacted by this change. The next one on the list is R0115, and that's frequency and content of CSS reports on switching via the DCC portal. So this change was raised by Ofgem to make updates to CSS reports provided by the switching operator, and for those reports to be provided on a weekly basis. And to be designed in such a way that only genuine switches between suppliers are reported. So what currently happens is the latter is not possible, as all switches at MPID level are reported without any indication of the actual switching flows. So section 7.3 of the switching operator service definition is going to be updated to include details of 2 new reports, which will be provided to Ofgem, and the frequency of weekly. Next up, we've got R0119. and this is annulment definition. So the REC code manager has identified parties using annulments when in fact they should be using other processes. The lack of clear definition of what an annulment is, we think, could be a contributing factor to this. So this change proposal will provide an amendment to paragraphs 10.1 and 10.3 of Schedule 23 registration services, and that's to clarify when the annulment process should be used and the requirements for suppliers. Schedule 1 interpretations and definitions is also being updated. The definition for annulled is being amended to make it clearer. Next on the list is 150. And this is on-site aggregation as a method to facilitate third-party access, BSC P455. So this was following a modification proposal to the BSC code, which will allow on-site aggregation as a method for third-party access on private networks. And because of this, the code manager is required to amend the REC to place a requirement on the meter equipment managers appointed by the boundary points electricity supplier to rectify any faults found within the submeters used in the on-site aggregation methodology. So Schedule 14, metering operations, is being updated, and that's being updated to replace a requirement in Section 20, proving tests, electricity only, for mowers to rectify faults found on submeters used in the aggregation methodology, and also submit the on-site aggregation form. Next on the list, we've got R0203, and this is CSS retry strategy. So this change proposal will amend the legal text in section 2.4 of the switching data management schedule, and that is to reflect the retry strategy, which is already currently in the central switching service system, as there is currently a mismatch. And what this change proposal will do as well is also provide an updated strategy that ensures the DCC will have a system in place to ensure that any future changes to the retry strategy won't happen unless a change proposal has been raised first. So the only stakeholder impacted by this is the CSS provider, and Schedule 24 switching data management is being updated to reflect that strategy. Next up is 206, and this is crosscode changes to align with BSC CP1598. So this change proposal has been raised to align with the BSC CP, which is 1598. And within that CP, it states that 6 scenario variants of market messages specified within the early drafting of P375 were not progressed to the final solution of P375. And the REC CP R0008. So as those scenario variants weren't captured within the data specification, the relevant market participants won't be able to use the DTN to exchange relevant data, and that means that they have to use less secure mechanisms to send and receive the data. And then that means that the original intent of the modification P375 has yet to be achieved. So the missing scenario variants are being added to the data specification, and it means that the meter operator agents will be able to use the DTN to exchange that relevant data rather than the less secure means. Energy suppliers and meter operator agents will be impacted by this change, and the data specs being updated, which is the REC data catalogue. Next on the list, we have a housekeeping change, which is R0211. This is the November 2024 housekeeping change, and this is just to correct typographical and formatting errors, and also allows us the opportunity to provide clarity, improve consistency and accuracy across the REC services. This has followed the housekeeping change proposal rather than the standard change, which means that it progresses straight to final report, as there are no impacts on anybody. So as part of this change, the smart meter installer, domestic customer and micro business customer surveys are being updated, and that's to add the demographic questions to the front page. And the Supply point switching API technical specification is also being updated to add error messages, like further details of error messages within there as well. Next on the list, so we have R0182, which is the second levelization CP. So this one was approved to go to Ofgem. We're still awaiting the authority decision. So this is not going to go into the November release. We are expecting to receive a decision after the November release, and it does need to be implemented before the 31st of December. So once we've had that decision, we will communicate out to you and let you know when this is going to be released. But I thought I'd cover it in the webinar just to give you a bit more information anyway. So this CP will introduce the necessary governance and charging amendments to the existing payment method levelisation reconciliation arrangements. They were introduced as part of R0147, and this particular CP will allow for multi-register reconciliation. It will allow for ongoing reconciliation that accounts for a split in both single rate and multi-register metering assets. It will also allow for a one-off retrospective calculation for the period dating back from the proposed effective implementation date of the 1st of January back to the implementation of the original reconciliation mechanism, which was on the 1st of April 2024. As I mentioned, it's been referred to the authority, so we will let you know once we've had that decision and a date of when that will be released. Schedule 31, payment method levelisation reconciliation is being updated, and that's to include the requirements to submit data split by single and multi-rate register. And Schedule 1, interpretations and definitions is also being updated to include a new definition for the retrospective recalculation. Next on the list, we've got R98, which allows for optional fuzzy searching within EES. So it will introduce a new configuration settings within the EES API, which will enable a search to be exact or fuzzy. This change was due to go in back in August. However, we identified some issues with the performance of EES. If it were to be implemented, they have been resolved now. We've fully tested it. We've done assurance on the testing, and we are happy for it to go into the release. Stakeholders to be impacted, EES provider and anyone that uses EES. There aren't actually any products that will be impacted. It is just a technical change. Next on the list is 108. Again, this one was supposed to be implemented back in August. But with the performance issues that we recognise, we did pull it. Again, it's been tested, we've done assurance of the testing and happy for it to go into this release. And this will introduce UPRN as a search functionality within EES. Same impacts as 98, so the EES provider and anyone that uses EES. And the electricity dam is being updated as part of this as well. It needs to add a new data item. So that is it. Shall we pause there to see if we've got any questions before I move on to the post-implementation support, Jenny?
Sure, yeah. We don't have any questions at the minute, so I think maybe we'll let it digest a little bit, and then we'll circle back around to it.
Cool. Yeah, there is a lot of information there. So post-implementation support, if you do need any help after this or after the release, you have any issues, you can raise a service desk inquiry, or you can email inquiries@recmanager.co.uk, or you can contact your OAM. If you have any technical issues relating to the gas inquiry service portal, you can contact ExoServe. This will be published to our portal page afterwards, and all of the underlined are linked to details that you can go on and do it that way. If it's relating to EES, as there are a few changes relating to that, you can email support@cnc-uk.com. And you can use the switching service management system to raise a ticket to do it about anything to do with switching. I just thought I'd take this opportunity as well to let you know of a few events that are coming up. So we do have a rec issues group on the 7th of November. The first half is the normal group, and then the second half is dedicated to I0200, which is around address management targets. There was an email that went out in the bulletin a couple of weeks ago. We are setting up a working group for that particular issue. So if you do want to sign up to that, there is a link within there, and I can post that in the chat afterwards. That's on the 7th of November. And we're also setting up an extraordinary rec issues group for issue 0189. And that is on the 20th of November. And that is all around the Voice of the Consumer issue, which is published to the portal. So do go give that a look.